The crisp March air carried the distant echo of laughter from Westbrook High School's outdoor eating area, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that brought joy. Maya Chen stood frozen behind the dumpsters, her lunch tray trembling in her hands. As she watched Derek Sullivan and his crew circle around Tommy Liu like predators who had found their next meal. What they didn't know, what nobody at this small Pennsylvania school could possibly imagine, was that the quiet girl with downcast eyes had spent the last 10 years mastering an ancient art that could level mountains. 10 years of training under Master Kim at the Golden Dragon Academy in San Francisco's Chinatown had taught her that true power came from restraint. But as she watched Derek force Tommy's face toward a trash can filled with discarded food, Maya felt that restraint beginning to crack like ice under pressure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen pressed her forehead against the cool window of her mother's sedan as they drove through the winding roads of Millfield, Pennsylvania, watching the landscape transform from the gentle hills of the interstate to the stark industrial remnants of what had once been thriving coal country. The skeletal remains of old mining equipment dotted the horizon like monuments to a forgotten era, and the smell of rust and rain seemed to permeate everything in this corner of Appalachia. At 17, Maya had lived in enough places to recognize the signs of a community that had seen better days. But there was something about Millfield that felt different from the bustling diversity of San Francisco. Something that made her feel simultaneously invisible and utterly exposed. Dr. Sarah Chen glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror, noting the way Maya's shoulders had drawn inward since they'd crossed the Pennsylvania state line 3 days earlier. The move from California to this small town of 8,000 people had been necessary for Sarah's career advancement, a chance to serve as head of emergency medicine at Millfield General Hospital. But she knew the sacrifice was primarily Maya's to bear. Leaving behind the Golden Dragon Academy, Master Kim's patient guidance, and the comfortable anonymity of a city where Asian faces weren't novelties had required more courage from her daughter than Sarah sometimes felt she had the right to ask. The apartment complex where they would be living sat on the edge of town, a collection of modest brick buildings that had been constructed in the way 1990s to house the families of workers at the local manufacturing plant. Their new home was clean and functional, with large windows that caught the morning light beautifully, but it felt impossibly small after their spacious San Francisco apartment with its view of the bay. Maya carried boxes up the narrow staircase, while her mother handled the paperwork with the rental office, each step feeling like she was climbing further away from everything she had ever known and loved. The Golden Dragon Academy had been Maya's second home since she was 7 years old, when her mother had enrolled her in kung fu classes after a particularly brutal incident with playground bullies, who had mocked her mixed heritage and quiet demeanor. Master Kim, an elderly Taiwanese immigrant who had fled to America during the political upheavals of the 1960s, had taken one look at the shy, wounded child and seen potential that even Maya's mother hadn't recognized. Under his patient tutelage, Maya had discovered that her naturally lean build and introspective personality were actually advantages in the flowing, meditative movements of Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. Master Kim's teachings went far beyond physical techniques, encompassing philosophy and ethics that had shaped Maya's understanding of strength and responsibility. The old master had survived war and displacement, had built a new life in a foreign country through determination and wisdom. And he had passed those lessons on to his students through stories as much as through forms and sparring. Maya could still hear his voice during their final lesson together, speaking in the measured cadence that had guided her through thousands of hours of training over the past decade. "The mountain does not boast of its height," Master Kim had said as they stood in the academy's meditation garden, surrounded by the sounds of San Francisco traffic and the distant foghorns of the bay. "The river does not announce its power. True mastery, little dragon, is like water. It finds the path of least resistance until resistance becomes necessary, and then it moves with the force of tsunamis. You carry with you now the knowledge of 10 years, but more importantly, you carry the wisdom to know when that knowledge should remain hidden. The drive to Westbrook High School on Monday morning took them through downtown Millfield, past the boarded-up storefronts that had once housed thriving businesses serving the mining community, past the diner where old men gathered to drink coffee and discuss the weather, past the single traffic light that marked the center of a town that felt like it existed in a different century from the technological bustle of the Bay Area. Maya watched teenagers walking toward the school building, noting the way they moved in established groups and patterns that spoke of relationships forged over years of shared experiences. Westbrook High School was a sprawling brick complex that had been built in the 1970s and showed its age in every weathered surface and outdated architectural detail. 600 students from grades 9 through 12 filled hallways that echoed with the particular acoustics of institutional spaces, their voices blending into a cacophony of adolescent energy that felt both familiar and foreign to Maya's ears. She had attended 3 different high schools during her mother's medical training, had learned to navigate the complex social ecosystems that developed in small communities, but each transition brought its own unique challenges and opportunities for either acceptance or rejection. The administrative office smelled of old coffee and industrial carpet, staffed by women who had probably worked there since the school's construction and who greeted Maya with the particular mixture of curiosity and pity that small towns reserved for outsiders. Principal Martinez, a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed to carry the weight of budget cuts and declining enrollment in every line of his face, welcomed Maya with the efficient courtesy of someone who had processed dozens of transfer students over the years but rarely saw them stay long enough to make lasting connections. Maya's schedule was typical for a junior with strong academic credentials, advanced placement courses mixed with the standard requirements that would prepare her for college applications in the fall. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What she discovered in those first few days was a microcosm of the larger world, complete with its own systems of justice and injustice, protection and exploitation, courage and cowardice that would soon test everything Master Kim had taught her about the proper use of power. The social architecture of Westbrook High School revealed itself to Maya with the methodical precision of a military reconnaissance mission, each day adding new layers to her understanding of the complex hierarchy that governed 600 teenagers in this corner of rural Pennsylvania. Her systematic observation skills, honed through years of studying opponent behavior in sparring matches, proved invaluable in decoding the unspoken rules and power dynamics that shaped every interaction, from morning homeroom to final dismissal. What emerged was a picture of institutional order maintained through a careful balance of fear, favoritism, and unquestioned tradition that had probably existed unchanged for decades. The cafeteria served as the most visible theater for these social dynamics, its layout functioning like a medieval court where seating position indicated status and proximity to power. At the geographical and social center of the room sat Derek Sullivan's table, a collection of athletic students whose leather jackets and confident postures marked them as the undisputed royalty of Westbrook High School's ecosystem. Derek himself commanded attention simply by existing in a space, his 6'3" frame and naturally charismatic personality drawing followers and admirers like iron filings to a magnet. His sandy brown hair and easy smile masked a calculating intelligence that Maya recognized as far more dangerous than simple physical intimidation. Brandon Cole and Kevin Walsh flanked Derek with the loyal devotion of medieval knights serving their chosen lord, their own considerable athletic achievements overshadowed by their primary role as enforcers of Derek's will throughout the school community. Brandon, with his wrestler's build and perpetually aggressive demeanor, seemed to relish opportunities for confrontation, while Kevin's basketball player height and quick wit made him the group's designated psychological warfare specialist. Together, they formed a triumvirate that had apparently maintained unopposed control over Westbrook High School's social order since their freshman year. Maya's introduction to this power structure came through Jessica Rodriguez, a junior with warm brown eyes and an infectious laugh, who had taken it upon herself to serve as unofficial ambassador to new students, navigating the treacherous waters of small-town high school politics. Jessica possessed the rare combination of social awareness and genuine kindness that allowed her to move freely between different groups without compromising her own integrity, making her an invaluable guide for someone trying to understand the complex web of relationships that define daily life at Westbrook. Their friendship had developed organically during second-period chemistry class, where Jessica's patient explanations of both molecular bonding and social dynamics had helped Maya begin to feel grounded in her new environment. Jessica had lived in Millfield her entire life, had watched the same group of students progress through elementary and middle school together, and she understood the particular challenges faced by outsiders trying to integrate into a community where family histories stretching back generations often determine social standing more than individual merit or achievement. The conversation that would prove most crucial to Maya's understanding of her new environment took place during lunch on her third day at Westbrook, as Jessica methodically explained the unwritten codes that governed student interaction in this particular corner of Pennsylvania coal country. They sat at a table near the windows overlooking the parking lot, positioned far enough from the center of power to speak freely, but close enough to observe the subtle displays of dominance and submission that played out during every meal period. Derek Sullivan's influence extended far beyond his immediate circle of friends, Jessica explained, reaching into every aspect of school life, through a network of relationships built on a combination of genuine popularity and carefully cultivated fear. His father owned Sullivan Construction, the largest employer in Millfield outside of the hospital and the few remaining manufacturing plants, giving the family significant economic influence in a community where good jobs were increasingly scarce. This financial power translated into social capital that made Derek effectively untouchable by normal disciplinary measures, since any serious consequences for his actions could potentially affect his father's business relationships with school board members and local politicians. The system Derek had created relied on a careful balance of rewards and punishments that kept the majority of students either actively supporting his authority or too intimidated to challenge it. Popular students who aligned themselves with his group enjoyed protection from harassment and access to the social events that defined teenage life in a small town, while those who crossed him found themselves subjected to a campaign of psychological warfare that could make their daily school experience miserable. The teachers and administrators, Jessica noted with a mixture of resignation and frustration, seemed either unaware of the extent of Derek's influence or unwilling to confront a situation that might create complications with powerful community members. Maya absorbed this information with the analytical mindset that Master Kim had taught her to apply to any potentially dangerous situation, recognizing patterns of behavior that transcended the specific personalities involved. What Derek had created was essentially a protection racket disguised as high school social dynamics, using his natural leadership abilities and family connections to establish a system where compliance was rewarded and resistance was punished with ruthless efficiency. The students who suffered most under this arrangement were inevitably those who lacked the social connections or family influence to protect themselves from retaliation. Tommy Liu represented the most vulnerable category of student in Derek's hierarchical system, a quiet sophomore whose immigrant parents ran a small restaurant on the edge of town and who possessed neither the athletic ability nor the family connections that might have provided some measure of protection. Jessica's voice carried genuine sympathy as she described Tommy's daily struggles to navigate an environment where his academic achievements and respectful demeanor counted for nothing against his status as an easy target for those seeking to demonstrate their power over others. The pattern of harassment that Tommy endured was both systematic and creative, ranging from subtle social exclusion to more overt forms of humiliation that stopped just short of actions that might attract administrative attention. Derek's crew had perfected the art of institutional bullying, using their understanding of adult blind spots and bureaucratic procedures to torment their chosen victims while maintaining plausible deniability when questioned by authority figures. The psychological impact of this sustained campaign was visible in Tommy's increasingly withdrawn behavior and the fearful way he moved through the hallways, always looking over his shoulder for the next attack. Maya's trained observation skills allowed her to recognize the sophisticated nature of Derek's operation, noting how he used his natural charisma to recruit accomplices and bystanders who might not have participated in bullying on their own but found themselves drawn into his orbit through a combination of social pressure and the desire to be associated with power. The students who formed his extended network weren't necessarily cruel by nature, but they had learned that their own safety and social standing depended on maintaining Derek's goodwill, creating a system where injustice was perpetuated by people who might otherwise have been forces for positive change. Her locker assignment placed her in the main hallway near the cafeteria, a location that would prove to be both blessing and curse as the days unfolded. As she stood there on that first morning, organizing textbooks and trying to decode the unwritten rules that governed teenage social interaction in rural Pennsylvania, Maya had no way of knowing that her careful plans for maintaining a low profile were about to be shattered by forces beyond her control. The weight of 10 years of training settled into Maya's consciousness like morning mist as she navigated the unfamiliar corridors of Westbrook High School, her footsteps silent against the polished linoleum floors in a way that would have made Master Kim proud. Every movement she made carried the unconscious grace of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting the art of controlled motion, though to the casual observer she appeared to be nothing more than another nervous transfer student trying not to draw attention to herself. The flowing forms of Northern Shaolin Kung Fu had become as natural to her as breathing, woven into the very fabric of her being through years of dawn practice sessions in Golden Gate Park and evening meditation in the Academy's incense-scented training hall. Master Kim had been more than an instructor during those formative years from age 7 to 17. He had become a surrogate grandfather figure who understood the particular challenges faced by a quiet, mixed-race girl growing up in a world that often demanded she choose sides in cultural conflicts she had never asked to join. The old master's weathered hands had guided her through not just the physical techniques of an ancient martial art, but through the deeper philosophical teachings that transformed mere fighting skills into a way of understanding one's place in the world. His academy in Chinatown had been a sanctuary where the wisdom of centuries mixed with the practical realities of modern American life, creating a space where students learned to balance tradition with adaptation. The Northern Shaolin style that Maya had mastered emphasized fluid, circular movements that could redirect an opponent's energy rather than meeting force with force, a principle that Master Kim insisted applied to all aspects of life rather than just physical confrontation. Unlike the linear, aggressive techniques favored by many Western martial arts, Kung Fu taught practitioners to become like water, flowing around obstacles until the moment came to strike with devastating precision. Maya's lean frame and naturally quiet demeanor had made her an ideal student for this approach, allowing her to develop techniques that relied on leverage, timing, and anatomical knowledge rather than brute strength. The philosophical foundation of her training ran even deeper than the physical skills, rooted in Master Kim's belief that martial arts were ultimately about service to others rather than personal aggrandizement. He had survived the chaos of war-torn Taiwan as a young man, had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of violence unchecked by wisdom, and had dedicated his American life to teaching students that true strength came from protecting the vulnerable rather than dominating the weak. These lessons had been reinforced through countless hours of meditation, through the study of classical texts that emphasize harmony and balance, and through practical exercises that taught students to recognize the difference between necessary action and unnecessary aggression. Maya's journey to her current level of mastery had not been smooth or automatic, requiring her to overcome not just physical limitations, but psychological barriers that stemmed from her early experiences with bullying and social isolation. The shy 7-year-old who had first entered the Golden Dragon Academy had been afraid of her own shadow, flinching at loud noises and avoiding eye contact with anyone who might pose a threat. Master Kim had recognized that her greatest enemy was not external opponents, but the fear and self-doubt that had taken root in her young mind, and he had crafted her training regimen to address both the physical and emotional aspects of her development. The progression through the colored belt system had marked not just increasing technical proficiency, but growing confidence and self-awareness that transformed Maya from a victim into someone who could protect herself and others when necessary. Each form she learned contained hidden applications that went far beyond the graceful movements visible to spectators, encoding centuries of battlefield experience into sequences that could be practiced as meditation or deployed as devastating combat techniques, depending on the circumstances. By the time she reached advanced levels, Maya could generate tremendous power through seemingly effortless movements, her understanding of leverage and anatomy allowing her to affect pressure points and joint manipulations that could incapacitate opponents much larger than herself. Master Kim's final lessons before her departure for Pennsylvania had focused on the most advanced aspects of her training, techniques that required not just physical skill but emotional maturity and ethical grounding to use responsibly. The pressure point strikes that could temporarily disrupt nervous system function, the joint locks that could immobilize attackers without causing permanent damage, and the internal energy cultivation that allowed practitioners to maintain calm focus even in the midst of chaos. These were skills that came with tremendous responsibility and the understanding that they should never be used except in defense of oneself or others who could not protect themselves. The philosophy that governed all of this training could be summed up in Master Kim's favorite teaching, delivered in his patient, accented English during quiet moments between more intensive physical practice. True mastery, he would explain, was not about the ability to defeat opponents, but about the wisdom to avoid conflicts that served no constructive purpose. The greatest kung fu practitioners throughout history had been remembered not for the fights they won, but for the peace they preserved, not for the enemies they defeated, but for the students they inspired to become better versions of themselves. Maya carried these teachings with her as she moved through her first days at Westbrook High School, observing the social dynamics and power structures that governed teenage interaction in this small Pennsylvania community. Her trained eyes could read body language and aggressive postures with the same ease that others might read street signs, recognizing the subtle indicators of dominance and submission that played out in hallway encounters and cafeteria seating arrangements. The skills that allowed her to anticipate and counter physical attacks also made her acutely aware of psychological manipulation and social intimidation, giving her insights into human behavior that most of her new classmates would never develop. The irony was not lost on her that 10 years of training designed to make her formidable in physical confrontation had actually made her more committed to avoiding such confrontations whenever possible. Master Kim's teachings had shown her that violence was almost always the result of failed communication or unresolved fear, and that truly skilled practitioners could often diffuse dangerous situations through presence and awareness long before they escalated to physical contact. This understanding made her hyper-conscious of the brewing tension she observed around Westbrook High School, the unspoken hierarchies and resentments that created an environment where conflict seemed inevitable. As Maya settled into her classes and began to understand the rhythms of her new school, she found herself mentally cataloging the various personality types and social groupings that would shape her experience over the coming months. Her training had taught her to assess potential threats and allies with the same systematic approach she brought to learning new forms, observing patterns of behavior and relationship dynamics that revealed character more clearly than any verbal introduction ever could. The administrative response to the situation, as Jessica described it, reflected the particular challenges faced by educators in small communities where family relationships and economic considerations often trumped educational priorities. Principal Martinez and his staff were caught between their professional obligations to maintain order and their practical need to avoid conflicts with influential community members, whose support was essential for school funding and their own job security. This created an environment where certain students operated with effective immunity from consequences, while others found themselves abandoned by the very system that was supposed to protect them. As Maya processed this information and began to understand the true nature of the environment she had entered, she found herself thinking about Master Kim's teachings regarding the responsibility that came with power and knowledge. The old master had often spoken about the obligation of those with strength to protect those without it, emphasizing that true martial arts were ultimately about service to others rather than personal advancement. The situation at Westbrook High School presented exactly the kind of moral challenge that Master Kim had prepared her to face, though she suspected that even his wisdom might be tested by the complex realities of teenage social warfare in rural Pennsylvania. The incident that would forever alter Maya's carefully maintained neutrality at Westbrook High School began with what appeared to be an ordinary Tuesday lunch period, the kind of routine school day that passes without notice until a single moment transforms everything that follows. Maya had settled into her usual spot near the windows with Jessica, their conversation drifting between chemistry, homework and weekend plans when the atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted with the subtle but unmistakable tension that precedes violence. The change was so gradual that most students continued eating and talking without awareness, but Maya's heightened senses, trained through years of anticipating attacks in Master Kim's sparring sessions, immediately recognized the electrical charge in the air that signaled approaching conflict. Tommy Liu sat alone at a corner table near the lunch line, methodically working through his geometry homework while eating the homemade lunch his mother had packed that morning. His small frame was hunched over his textbook in a posture that Maya recognized as defensive, the body language of someone who had learned to make himself as invisible as possible in hopes of avoiding unwanted attention. The lunch his mother had prepared reflected the care and cultural traditions of their family's restaurant, featuring dishes that stood out dramatically from the standard American fare, favored by most of his classmates. Maya could see the pride and love that had gone into the preparation, even as she understood how these visible markers of difference would make Tommy an even more attractive target for those seeking to establish their dominance through humiliation. Derek Sullivan's approach to Tommy's table was calculated and theatrical, designed to attract maximum attention from the surrounding students while maintaining the pretense of casual interaction. His movements carried the confidence of someone who had never faced serious resistance, each step deliberate and purposeful as he navigated between tables with Brandon and Kevin, following at carefully measured distances. Maya watched Derek's face as he closed in on his target, noting the cold calculation behind his practiced smile, the way his eyes assessed Tommy's vulnerability with the predatory focus of someone who viewed other human beings as opportunities for entertainment rather than individuals deserving of respect. The verbal assault began with seemingly innocent questions about Tommy's lunch, Derek's voice carrying just enough volume to ensure that nearby tables could hear every word while remaining below the threshold that might attract teacher intervention. From across the crowded cafeteria, he made elaborate comments about the unfamiliar aromas and unusual presentation of Tommy's food, his tone suggesting curiosity while his actual intent was clearly to mark these differences as somehow shameful or disgusting. Brandon and Kevin provided enthusiastic support for Derek's performance, their laughter and encouraging comments creating an atmosphere of group participation in what was essentially a public humiliation ritual designed to reinforce both Tommy's isolation and Derek's authority. Maya felt her jaw clench as she watched Tommy's shoulders draw inward, his attempts to ignore the harassment only seeming to encourage Derek's escalating creativity in finding new ways to torment his chosen victim. The sophomore's quiet responses and obvious discomfort seemed to energize Derek rather than satisfy him, as if Tommy's pain was the actual goal rather than any specific behavioral change or submission. Maya recognized this dynamic from her early experiences with bullying, understanding that some people derived genuine pleasure from the suffering of others and would continue escalating their attacks until forced to stop by superior power or authority intervention. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Derek decided that verbal humiliation was insufficient for his purposes and began making increasingly aggressive physical gestures, reaching across the table to touch Tommy's food, while making exaggerated faces of disgust for the entertainment of the growing audience. His fingers prodded and poked at the carefully prepared dishes while he provided running commentary about their supposed inadequacy compared to normal American food, each touch a violation that went far beyond simple teasing into territory that any reasonable observer would recognize as deliberate cruelty designed to degrade and dehumanize its target. Tommy's quiet pleas for Derek to stop only seemed to intensify the performance, his obvious distress providing the exact reaction that Derek had been seeking from the beginning of the encounter. Maya could see tears beginning to form in Tommy's eyes as he watched his mother's loving preparation being deliberately contaminated and destroyed, the symbolic violence of the act extending far beyond the immediate physical damage to represent an attack on his family's culture and dignity. The other students in the cafeteria had begun to take notice of the drama unfolding at Tommy's table, some watching with uncomfortable fascination while others pointedly looked away in a display of willful blindness that Maya found almost as disturbing as Derek's active cruelty. The climactic moment arrived when Derek apparently decided that mere destruction of Tommy's lunch was insufficient to achieve his goals and began implementing what appeared to be a carefully planned escalation designed to create a defining moment that would establish his absolute authority over his victim. With theatrical flourish, Derek swept Tommy's entire lunch from the table, sending containers and food scattering across the floor in a mess of spilled rice, scattered vegetables, and broken plastic that represented hours of his mother's preparation and care. The sound of the impact echoed through the suddenly quiet cafeteria as conversation stopped and all attention focused on the unfolding drama. Maya watched in growing horror as Derek produced his phone and began recording Tommy's reaction to the destruction of his lunch, apparently intending to capture his victim's humiliation for later broadcast and prolonged entertainment. The violation represented by this documentation of Tommy's suffering struck Maya as particularly cruel, transforming a private moment of pain into public entertainment that could be shared and reshared indefinitely through social media platforms. Tommy's face showed the devastating realization that his degradation was being preserved for future consumption, his expression shifting from hurt to absolute despair as he understood that his humiliation would extend far beyond this single incident. The final escalation came when Derek pointed toward the nearby trash can with its collection of discarded lunch remnants and half-eaten food, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent cafeteria as he issued an ultimatum that revealed the true extent of his sadistic creativity. The command he gave Tommy was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but its content represented such a complete assault on human dignity that even some of Derek's usual supporters seemed uncomfortable with the direction their leader had chosen to take his entertainment. Maya felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she processed the implications of what Derek was demanding, understanding that she was witnessing a moment that would define not just Tommy's experience at Westbrook High School, but her own response to the systematic cruelty that apparently governed daily life in this institution. The cafeteria had fallen completely silent except for the sound of Tommy's labored breathing and the soft electronic beeping of Derek's phone as it continued, recording what was clearly intended to be the climactic moment of Tommy's complete submission to Derek's authority. Maya could see Tommy's internal struggle playing out across his face, the desperate calculation of someone trying to determine whether compliance or resistance would result in less suffering, the terrible arithmetic of survival that no 15-year-old should ever be forced to perform. Around them, hundreds of students watched in fascination or horror, but none moved to intervene in what was clearly a defining moment for their entire school community's understanding of justice, courage, and human decency. The silence in the cafeteria stretched like a taut wire ready to snap as Tommy Liu remained frozen beside the overflowing trash can, his small frame trembling with the weight of an impossible choice that no human being should ever be forced to make. Derek Sullivan's phone continued its electronic witness to what was clearly intended to be Tommy's final humiliation. The device held steady in hands that showed no trace of uncertainty or remorse. The watching students seemed collectively to hold their breath, some horrified by what they were witnessing, others drawn by the terrible fascination of watching another person's complete degradation unfold before their eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the scene, illuminating every detail of Tommy's anguish, while Derek's triumphant smile grew wider with each passing second of his victim's hesitation. Maya felt 10 years of Master Kim's philosophical teachings crystallize into a moment of absolute moral clarity that cut through all considerations of personal safety and social consequence. The old master's voice echoed in her memory with the gentle authority that had guided her through countless hours of training and meditation, reminding her that true strength was measured not by the ability to avoid conflict, but by the courage to act when action was the only path to justice. Every principle she had absorbed about the responsibility that came with power, every lesson about using skill in service of those who could not protect themselves, every moment of preparation for exactly this kind of moral test converged into a single point of decision that would define not just her own character, but the kind of person she chose to be in the world. The weight of her cultural heritage pressed against Maya's consciousness as she considered the generations of struggle that had brought her family to this moment of prosperity and safety in America. Her grandmother had fled the chaos of war-torn China with nothing but the clothes on her back and an unshakable determination to create opportunities for her descendants that she herself had never enjoyed. Her mother had worked through medical school while raising a daughter alone, sacrificing personal comfort and social connections to ensure that Maya would have access to the kind of education and training that could open doors previously closed to women of their background. The privilege of her kung fu training, the luxury of philosophical contemplation about the proper use of power, the freedom to choose her own path in life, all of these advantages had been purchased through the sacrifices of women who had faced far greater challenges with far fewer resources. Dr. Sarah Chen had raised her daughter to understand that privilege came with obligation, that those blessed with advantages had a duty to extend protection to those less fortunate, and that silence in the face of injustice was itself a form of participation in cruelty. The comfortable life they had enjoyed in San Francisco, the educational opportunities that had allowed Maya to train with one of the finest martial arts masters on the West Coast, the financial security that came from her mother's medical career. All of these blessings carried with them the expectation that Maya would use her advantages to make the world more just rather than simply more comfortable for herself. The conversations they had shared about responsibility and character during long walks through Golden Gate Park suddenly took on new urgency as Maya faced the first real test of whether she had internalized These values deeply enough to act on them when the cost might be substantial. The weight of her mother's sacrifice in moving to Millfield pressed against Maya's consciousness as she considered the potential consequences of intervention. Dr. Chen had left behind established professional relationships, a thriving practice, and the cultural community that had sustained them both through the difficult years following her divorce, all for the opportunity to serve as head of emergency medicine in a small town where her expertise could make a genuine difference in people's lives. The fresh start that her mother had worked so hard to create could be jeopardized by the kind of dramatic confrontation that Maya was contemplating, potentially forcing them to relocate once again if the powerful Sullivan family decided to make their lives in Millfield impossible. The thought of disappointing her mother, of undermining the careful planning and sacrifice that had brought them to Pennsylvania, created a knot of anxiety in Maya's stomach that competed with her growing outrage at the scene unfolding before her. Yet as Maya watched Tommy's shoulders shake with suppressed sobs, as she saw Derek's triumphant smile and the eager anticipation on Brandon and Kevin's faces, as she observed the hundreds of students who remained seated and silent rather than standing up for basic human decency, she understood that some moral lines could not be crossed without fundamentally changing who she was as a person. Master Kim had taught her that the techniques of Kung Fu were tools that could be used for construction or destruction, but that the choice of how to use them revealed the true character of the practitioner, the power that flowed through her. Trained muscles and reflexes meant nothing if she was unwilling to deploy it in defense of the innocent, and the philosophical principles she had studied for years would be revealed as empty intellectual exercises if she failed to apply them when they were most needed. The institutional failures that had allowed Derek's reign of terror to continue, unchecked, weighed heavily on Maya's mind as she considered the broader implications of what she was witnessing. Principal Martinez and his administrative staff had clearly abdicated their responsibility to maintain a safe learning environment, either through willful blindness or calculated indifference to the suffering of students who lacked powerful family connections. The teachers who moved through the cafeteria with carefully averted eyes demonstrated the kind of moral cowardice that allowed systemic abuse to flourish in institutions where adults prioritized their own comfort over their professional obligations to protect the children in their care. The failure of the educational system to address Derek's behavior had created a vacuum of authority that someone would have to fill. And Maya began to understand that her intervention might serve not just to protect Tommy but to send a message to the entire school community about the consequences of allowing cruelty to flourish unchallenged. The moment of decision arrived with crystalline clarity as Derek raised his voice to address the entire cafeteria, clearly intending to ensure that Tommy's humiliation would be witnessed by every student present and remembered by everyone who would hear the story retold in the days and weeks to come. His words carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced meaningful consequences for his actions, the entitled assumption that his entertainment was more important than another human being's dignity. The phone in his hand continued recording as he gestured toward the trash can with theatrical flourish, his performance designed to maximize both Tommy's suffering and his own social capital among the students, who might learn valuable lessons about the cost of crossing Derek Sullivan. Maya felt her breathing slow and deepen as Master Kim's meditation techniques automatically engaged, her body preparing for action while her mind achieved the state of calm focus that would allow her to move with maximum precision and control. The familiar sensation of centered awareness settled over her consciousness like a comfortable cloak, bringing with it the confidence that came from thousands of hours of practice and preparation for exactly this kind of situation. Her peripheral vision expanded to encompass the entire cafeteria, cataloging potential threats and escape routes while her primary attention remained fixed on Derek's increasingly animated performance and Tommy's growing desperation. The philosophical framework that Master Kim had spent years Helping her construct began to assert itself over her emotional responses, transforming raw anger into controlled determination and unfocused outrage into precise tactical thinking. The ancient wisdom of the northern Shaolin tradition emphasized the importance of acting from a place of inner stillness rather than reactive emotion, teaching practitioners to become instruments of natural justice rather than agents of personal vengeance. Maya understood that her intervention needed to be surgical rather than explosive, designed to end Derek's immediate cruelty while opening space for longer-term solutions to the institutional problems that had allowed his behavior to flourish. Tommy's hand reached toward the trash can with the mechanical compliance of someone whose spirit had been temporarily broken by sustained psychological assault. His movements those of a person who had calculated that submission might result in less suffering than continued resistance. Maya recognized the exact moment when he made the decision to comply with Derek's demands, saw the light dim in his eyes as he accepted that he was powerless to protect his own dignity in the face of superior social position and institutional indifference. The sight of Tommy's defeat triggered something primal and protective in Maya's consciousness, activating responses that went beyond rational calculation to encompass the deeper instincts that drove people to risk everything in defense of fundamental human values. The cultural dimension of Derek's attack on Tommy carried particular resonance for Maya, who understood firsthand the additional vulnerability faced by students whose families had immigrated to America with hopes of creating better lives for their children. The deliberate targeting of Tommy's homemade lunch, the mocking of his family's culinary traditions, the implicit message that his cultural background made him somehow less worthy of respect and dignity, all of these elements combined to transform what might have been simple bullying into something approaching a hate crime. Maya thought about her own experiences with casual racism and cultural dismissal, remembering the subtle and not-so-subtle ways that she had been made to feel like an outsider, even in supposedly progressive San Francisco. And she recognized that Derek's cruelty toward Tommy represented a microcosm of the broader challenges faced by immigrant communities throughout America. Maya Chen rose from her seat with the fluid grace of water becoming a tsunami, her movement carrying the accumulated power of 10 years of disciplined training and 17 years of moral education, guided by a mother who had taught her that strength without compassion was mere brutality. The conversations throughout the cafeteria died completely as students sensed that something fundamental was about to change, that the careful balance of power that had governed their daily lives was about to be challenged by forces they had never considered. Her chair slid back silently on the polished floor, her body language shifting from passive observation to active engagement in a transformation that was visible to anyone with the knowledge to recognize the signs of a trained martial artist preparing for action. Jessica looked up at Maya with sudden understanding and concern, recognizing the transformation in her friend's posture and expression that signaled the end of passive observation and the beginning of active intervention. The chemistry student, who had been patiently explaining molecular bonds and social hierarchies, was suddenly gone, replaced by someone whose presence filled the space around her with an almost electric sense of contained power and focused intention. Jessica's eyes widened as she processed the implications of what she was witnessing, understanding instinctively that Maya was about to reveal capabilities that would fundamentally alter the social dynamics of Westbrook High School. The distance between Maya's table and Tommy's position near the trash can seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously as she moved through the suddenly static atmosphere of the cafeteria, her trained senses cataloging potential obstacles and escape routes while her conscious mind focused on the techniques that would allow her to end Derek's cruelty with minimal violence and maximum effectiveness. Master Kim's teachings about the proper application of force echoed in her memory, reminding her that true mastery lay in using exactly the amount of power necessary to achieve justice, no more and no less than the situation demanded. The ancient principle of proportional response would guide her actions, ensuring that her intervention served the cause of protection rather than revenge. Her footsteps made no sound against the polished floor, years of training in silent movement allowing her to approach the unfolding drama without alerting Derek or his companions to her presence until she chose to reveal herself. The other students in the cafeteria began to take notice of her movement, conversations dying away as they sensed that something significant was about to occur. But Derek remained focused on his victim with the tunnel vision of a predator who had never learned to watch for threats from his flanks. Maya could see the exact angle of approach that would allow her to intervene most effectively, positioning herself to control the situation while minimizing the risk of injury to Tommy or the innocent bystanders who surrounded them. The moment stretched like a held breath as Maya covered the final steps toward confrontation, her mind clear and focused on the task ahead while her heart carried the weight of all the lessons and values that had brought her to this point. Master Qin's final teaching echoed in her consciousness with the clarity of temple bells, reminding her that the highest expression of martial arts was not the demonstration of superior technique, but the prevention of unnecessary suffering through the wise application of strength in service of justice. Tommy's hand hovered inches from the trash can as Derek's voice rose in triumphant anticipation of his victim's final humiliation, unaware that his reign of unchallenged cruelty was about to encounter a force that would change everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and the consequences of treating other human beings as objects for his entertainment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.